So I'm Dr. Craig Macmillan. I have a PhD in sociology, a master's degree in plant protection science from Cal Poly, and a bachelor's in philosophy. I grew up in the state of Iowa. I went to the University of Iowa. When I finished my undergraduate education at the University of Iowa, I'm not kidding, the very next day I got in a car and I drove cross country to Santa Barbara to follow my dreams. Let's get out of here. Let's do this. Second day in Santa Barbara, I'm looking for a job. I found an ad for a tasting room job at Gainey Vineyard in Santa Ynez. I called them. They said, come up and interview. I went up and interviewed. They offered me the job on the spot. So I started working at a tasting room, and that was where I fell in love with wine. Absolutely fell in love with the whole thing. Vineyard, the winemaking, sales, marketing, all. I was in love with the whole deal. A couple of years later, that next year, started working in wineries. 2 years later, I was leasing vineyard ground and farming it myself. About 2-3 years after that, I started my own consulting company, which is still active. But my main period of activity was during the 90s. In the late 90s, I decided I was more interested in research and education, so I came back to school in 2003 and got my PhD in 2012. Now, during my consulting time, I found that we have lots and lots of science and technology to bring to bear on practically every problem that there is. We are very good at that. In my line of work, I found that the problems that we had, the obstacles, were the people and the organizations and the governments and the non-governmental organizations and social movements and shared attitudes and beliefs and all these things. And so as I was trying to figure out what to do with my PhD, I asked around and somebody said, you're a sociologist. And I said, I am. And they said, yeah, check it out. And so that's how I got into sociology. And my areas of interest in terms of research are where the practical levels of things like farming come and meet the mushy, poorly defined aspects of human behavior. So, today's issue is agricultural labor. Well, I guess I should have said the name of my talk. Values in vineyards, bringing a sociological perspective to the wine industry. We'll get to that in a second. Today's issue, agricultural labor. Why is agricultural labor an issue? People need jobs. Agriculture is the largest industry, I think, third largest industry in the state of California, something like that. We're the largest ag economy in the US. We are larger than many nations. Our ag economy is bigger than most European nations, believe it or not. So why is it an issue? People should be coming here to work. Well, number one, vineyards require lots of people. So you need a large workforce. Large workforces are always hard to maintain. The other problem is that it's seasonal. So I need a lot of people right now, and I need them for a week, and then I don't need them anymore. That's a tough sell from an employment standpoint, right? That's a problem. What are these people going to do in the meantime? And then the other thing is that you've got this cost constraint. Hey, I got an idea. Why don't I hire seasonal workers, but I pay them year-round? They don't leave, they stay, but I'm paying them enough of a wage that they could live here for the entire year. That's how college professors work, right, Dr. Amspacher? We get paid so much for working 9 months out of the year that we can just take 3 months off. Exactly. That's how we do. That's how we do it. Exactly. Very leisurely. But it makes the cost so high that the cost of labor then becomes impossibly out of control. Now, there's other aspects to this. I'm going to talk to you about where farm labor comes from and what makes it special. Agricultural labor is different than other kinds of labor, and that is a huge part of what we're doing. Because of that, which I'll reveal in a minute, most of our agricultural labor comes from migrants. And I don't mean migrants like moving up and down the state of California. I mean immigrants, people who migrate from another country. Now, what's interesting about this is that is not just true for the US. The majority of ag labor that works in vineyards in France is from Central and Eastern Europe. Also a fair number of Turks. In Germany, the lowest wage jobs are filled primarily by North Africans and again, Turks. Italy, the same pattern. So this is not just a United States situation. There's something about agricultural work that's special, okay? So there's legal aspects to that. How do you move people across borders? And what do you do with them once they're there, and all those kinds of things. And is that migration legal or not, based on the rules of the particular country? Political aspects of migration. So let's say it's completely legal, but there may be some kind of a political reason why you either can't, or that might drive me to immigrate, which we'll talk about. There's social aspects as well. Those are a little bit more kind of touchy-feely. And then there's really big cultural differences between employers, employees, and the communities that they live in because of this transnational aspect to this particular labor market. And again, this is not just unique to California. This is true all over the place. Then it gets really crazy because we now live in a global economy. So what happens in Russia has a huge impact on what's going to happen in Mexico or whatever. So now geopolitical things, not even economic, just political decisions. Those things now can impact us in ways they never have before. Economic balances, changes in foreign economies, changes in internal economy of the U.S., change in the relationship of the economy of the U.S. So things like exchange rates, availability of transportation, etc. And then we also have cultural changes that are taking place in ours and other nations. So if I have a cultural difference between my employees, myself, and my community, I can work on that. I can work on that. I can learn about their home culture. I can help them assimilate into my culture. I can act as an advocate, or as a go-between, or as a facilitator with the community that is not my employee. But if their home country, if their home culture is changing, I mean, crud, I can't keep up with changes in the United States. How the hell am I going to keep up with changes on a global scale, right? I mean, and plus I'm getting old, man. You know, I'm like 45. You know, I don't got time, right? So, this is where the sociological perspective comes in. On the, does it just work here? Okay, yeah. So on this side, oh, I get it. Laser pointers don't work on flat screen TVs. Aha, thank you. In terms of the hierarchies of sciences, you can think of it in terms of working from the macro and the physical, and then working up to the social and beyond the social. So in a traditional model, physics is the basis, chemistry is based on physics, biology is based on chemistry. We're animals, we have minds, so psychology is based on that, and then sociology goes beyond that. In the real world here, this is kind of what my life is like here. It's the mathematicians like take precedence, and then everybody else just dumps on the sociologists. And there's reasons why that is. Sociologists are not popular people at cocktail parties. We're not. Why? Because we are interested in things that people either don't care about or they don't want to think about. Right? If you're a cancer researcher, everybody wants to talk to you. You're trying to save people's lives. If you're a sociologist, nobody wants to talk to you because I don't understand what it is that you do or why you would be interested in doing it. And it frustrates me because it's so important. And speaking of important, that leads us to the concept of values. Hey, we started on ag labor. Now, where the hell are we going here? Well, I'm going to get back to it. Values. Values are guiding things in our lives. It's a universal human trait, which is one thing that makes it interesting. It's a very nebulous word. American values, family values, conservative values, liberal values, Christian values, Judeo-Christian values. But that idea that there is such a thing as values and that they're important, that's universal. And so, what are they? Well, they're motivations towards desirable end states or goals. Values are what's important to us. So for all the things that you can say about values, if you think about what's a value, freedom is a value. It's important to me, right? All those kinds of things. Now, sociologically, this is interesting. When groups of people have these shared motivations, guess what? They will act similarly, and they also will act in concert. And if their values are aligned enough, they'll act at the same time. This explains things like mass migrations, okay? Potentially. Now, there's a person out there, this guy Schwartz, Shalom Schwartz, who has done amazing work at getting a handle on what are values. It's such a slippery thing. What are values? What desirable end states and goals? That's right. That's pretty basic. You know, I'm not a pigeon. You know, what's a pigeon's end state? It wants to get to the seed and it wants to maybe sleep. I don't know if pigeons sleep, but pretty basic. Humans. What are desirable end states for humans? All kinds of stuff, right? So he tried to get a handle on it. And he said, well, first of all, values are specifically important because they are inextricably linked to affect. Does anybody know what affect means as a noun? Not expecting you to. It's a fancy word for emotion. It's a fancy word for emotion. Values are intrinsically linked to emotions. And if you're thinking about what's desirable, that would make sense. Things that are desirable make me happy. Right? If I don't meet my goals, how do I feel? I feel sad. I want to avoid that. Right? So they're tied inextricably to emotions. They refer to these desirable goals. They also transcend specific actions. This is really crucial. The value of freedom can be a guiding principle in terms of your motivations for all kinds of different situations. It's not situation specific. That makes it different than a norm. All right? A norm is a rule that we follow that is situation specific. So here's an example of a norm. You all have notebooks and pencils and pens, and you're very dutifully taking notes. That's a norm. That's an expected action, right? Now, you being in this classroom, though, as part of your undergraduate education, that might be more tied to a value of personal growth, a value of economic improvement from the benefit of your degree, something like that. And then, let's see where we go next. Yeah, that's right. So, if everything can be a value, then how do I get a handle on it? Well, Schwartz came up with this great model, and he said there's 4 basic types of values. So I've got specific subcategories, but I want you to pay attention to the big picture. So openness to change, and that includes specifically things like the desire for self-direction, the desire for stimulation, and hedonism. Can anybody raise your hand, tell me what hedonism means? This is exactly why my dissertation research failed. I'll tell you about it later. Hedonism means that you highly value sensual pleasure. A big ice cream sundae with nuts and whipped cream and everything, that's hedonistic. Its value is that it is so over-the-top pleasurable. Right? Illicit drug use, hedonistic. So if you are interested in stimulation, learning new things, seeing new things, having your heart rate go up and down, if you are interested in making decisions for yourself, and if you're interested in just pure pleasure, that puts you in that area of being very open to change. You're very comfortable with change, you hippie. Self-enhancement values are similar, but they're a little bit more controlled. They're a little bit more, hey, you know what? I'm gonna maybe not go quite so crazy. So hedonism actually is shared with this. So hedonism, people often talk about these enrichment that they get, the enhancement to their life and the enhancement to their sense of self that they get from hedonistic experiences. This is why people do things like go skydiving on their birthday. Birthday is an important psychological marker. It's an important marker in the life course. It's also symbolic in our culture overall. How many folks in this class are over 21? How many folks are over 21 and 3/4? Ah, you have a harder question to answer though, huh? The magic number is 21. Believe me, if the magic number for drinking in the US was 21 years, 9 months, would have been that fast. I am in or I am out, right? Achievement. We want to succeed in the eyes of others as well as ourselves. And then power. Now, power specifically is about having control over your environment. We talk about power usually in a somewhat negative sense. We say someone's exerting power, or someone's being powerful. What it really means is that you have control of your work. If I can say, will you please do this for me, and someone will do it, I can get what I want relatively easily. If everywhere I go I ask people for things and they say no, I don't have very much power. So people want power. Now the conservation ones are a little bit different. These are ones where we value things that bring us security, like security. So you get a little bit older, say, wow, smoking bongs every night, that was a lot of fun, but kind of hard to hold the job. So maybe I'm going to think a little bit more about working that job and a little bit less about the hedonism, right? Conformity becomes more valuable. Oh my God, you know, they like me at work, I do a good job, but they're always staring at me. And I finally figured out it's because of these giant gauges that I have in my ear. And so, you know what, maybe I'll conform a little bit. That becomes more of a value to you, right? Because I want to keep what I have. I want conservation. And then tradition, you know, I'm going to do things because we've always done them that way. And that's different than habit. Habit is when I'm doing it without thinking. Tradition is like, Christmas is coming. Christmas is important. You know, Dead Week is coming. We always have a rager party on the Wednesday of Dead Week. We've got to do that again. Tradition, it's important. We've got to pass this down, right? And then self-transcendent. These are ones where you value aspects of your life or yourself that go outside of yourself. They transcend you. So being benevolent, which means to be giving. And universalism, being accepting of other people and other ideas, even if these things are a detriment to yourself. Where that brings us to then is a circle, where openness to change is on one side, and conservation, or not wanting change, is on the other, right? Same thing, self-enhancement. I want stuff for me. On the other side is self-transcendence. I want things for other people. If you think of it this way, and you ask people all the right questions, you could locate somebody in this space here. And indeed, Dr. Schwartz did this in 186 countries around the world, in I think 41 different languages, believe it or not. And he found there were some patterns. He found that college students tend to be more on the openness to change, self-enhancement side, and their teachers tended to be more on the conservation tradition side. I'm over here on the self-transcendence side. And that makes perfect sense, right? When you're young, you're open to change. You're learning. People want stimulation. People who are in the teaching professions, what are we doing? We are teaching you the truth. And we punish you if you do not report the correct information back to us. We are trying to get everybody on the same page. That's about as conservative as you can get, really, if you think about it in that term. All right, so we'll come back to this wheel in the very next slide. What does this have to do with the wine industry? Well, my belief is that if you think in this way and you watch people, you should start to think about where do they fit on this wheel. It's not a right or a wrong thing. It's not a good or a bad thing. But if you have a sense of where people's kind of tendencies are, then you're probably going to have a better idea of what they're likely to do in the future. So, consumer trends. If I'm selling wine, what kind of values do you think I should appeal to? There's no right answer because this research hasn't been done. But what do you think? Hedonism. Hedonism, absolutely. In the wine industry also, though, there's a strong element of tradition. So you could pitch it that direction, try to get both populations, right? I have one product that's like, you know, extreme Cabernet, whoa, it's so much fun, wow, it's so big flavors. And then I've got another one that is like, got a name that's like 1,000 syllables long, and you know, from vines that were planted at the time of Christ. I mean, there's two different ways you could go with this, right? Depending on who you're kind of trying to appeal to. I'm very interested in finding out what are the values and orientations of people in the wine industry. I'm particularly interested in the cultures. I'm very interested in vineyard managers and farmers and people like that. And so I'm very curious about where they fit in. And that research has not been done yet. So that's coming up in the future for me. All right, so what are some common issues in the wine industry? Well, we're going to talk about ag labor. How might a sociological perspective help to resolve these issues? Hopefully at this point I've made the case that the availability of ag labor is complex and it involves groups of people. So there you go. So these are a couple of concepts from sociology that apply to this, and I'm going to use this terminology during the rest of the talk. So, try to write it down if you want, but mostly I just want you to be able to understand what I'm saying. Population flows. Population flow is just simply the idea that people move from one place to another, and it's not simple, but they do move. And when you see a flow of people, then you start asking the question, well, why are they moving? And then we can ponder that, we can talk about that, whatever. But a population flow is when a group of people tend to move from one place to another. So immigration, classic example of that. Culture. Culture is the mental and physical world that is shared by people. So what are our shared beliefs? And what are our shared material things? Right? So I see a lot of work boots out there. Right? This is a cultural thing. Yeah, it's practical. It covers my foot, keeps my foot safe. But the way that I keep my foot safe is cultural. This is a very acceptable kind of footwear for a guy like me. Right? And a matter of fact, in the vineyard industry, people talk about, are you wearing boots or are you wearing sandals? Because winemakers wear sandals, grape growers wear boots.
That's not true.
It's not true. It's not true, but I'm telling you, it comes up. It comes up all the time. I was sitting in a meeting one time with this person, we're doing it, and he said, are you wearing boots or sandals? I'm not kidding. He said, are you wearing boots or sandals? Oh, you're wearing boots. You're cool. All right, I'll listen to what you have to say. So those kinds of things, they express who you belong to. That's culture. And it's shared ideas. He sees a material symbol that says, okay, yeah, you and I are simpatico. And then we become comfortable with those things. I would be more comfortable dressed appropriately for my culture than I would be for another culture, because I'm probably not as open to change, maybe, as somebody else. Although it might be stimulating to do that. Homophily, it's a word you hardly ever hear unless you're in sociology. And it's very simple. Homo, same, phile, to like the same. And all it is the tendency of people to hang out with other people like themselves. That's all it is. And I always think it's fascinating when you talk about homophily, people say, well, I don't fit the model. I'm not, that doesn't apply to me. My friends are so different. And I say, oh, really? Tell me about your friends. Well, all my close friends are here at Cal Poly. Oh, okay, yeah, oh, you're just all over the place, aren't you? Oh yeah, you have such a diverse group of friends that are between the ages of 17 and a half and 22.3, and they're all attending the same undergraduate university in the same town that draws heavily from the state of California for its student body. Right? Homophily. When you go into the lunchroom, you look for a place to sit down. Do you go sit by the people who seem the most distant from you, or do you tend to go sit with the people that seem similar to you? What are your friends like? They're probably similar to you in many ways. And then conceptions of race and ethnicity. This is important because this has ended up being a big chunk of where the end of ag labor comes into play. And it's not a simple thing. Race is physical features that define people into groups. So those can be defined all kinds of different ways. We're going to talk about some examples of that as we go. But the point here is that at a distance, one person can classify another person. I've already figured out where you fit in the race chart just by looking at you. That's the point of race. Ethnicity is different. Ethnicity is the social stuff. It's the beliefs, the customs, food, clothing, language, all the symbolic stuff. So sometimes that's apparent in things like clothing, but it's also not always apparent because a lot of the things that we do, like religious traditions, daily habits, stuff like that stuff's hidden. So ethnicity can be important. Those two things are different. Very important coming up here. Another concept is what's called occupational status. Homophily is kind of a fun one. Occupational status is pretty obvious. Some jobs are more prestigious than others. Doctors, everybody loves a doctor. Turns out athletes, believe it or not, very low. Yeah, you would not think that. But when you ask people in surveys, how much respect do you have for doctors? People say, a lot of respect. I have so much respect. If you ask them, say, how much respect do you have for professional athletes? They will say very little. Despite all the stuff that you see out in the culture, when you ask people in surveys, that's how it plays out. And it's interesting, I've known some college athletes from Iowa back when I was an undergrad, way before I ever did this, and the disconnect between the public life where they were celebrated as heroes and their private life where becoming known as an athlete, as soon as somebody found out you were an athlete, immediately they kind of dismissed you, was fascinating to me, and that's part of the same process. Standard of living, we constantly are talking about standard of living. The key for sociology is that it's the standard. What is the minimum that I personally need? All right? I personally need to have wine in my life. If I am in a situation where I don't have the money or I don't have the access to wine, then my standard of living is not being met. And I'm going to be upset about that. Think about things that you have in your life that may seem very basic, but if you were deprived of them, you would notice it. You'd have a serious negative experience. And I'm looking around and I can see a couple of things right from the get-go. Cell phones. When I was a boy, there was no such thing as a cell phone. First cell phone I ever had was a satchel phone. You could talk for 10 minutes, and that was only if you could get a signal. And the worst thing you can do to an undergraduate is take away their phone. No, I'm very serious about that. I'm very, very serious about that. If you want to punish somebody in a classroom, you demand their phone. Right? You've deprived them of their standard of living. Stratification is the fact that some people have more than others, and these processes happen everywhere. There's a stratification that takes place, and it takes place at every group level. There are hierarchies and stratifications within Cal Poly, although Cal Poly is a very narrow slice of the human population. It's maybe not always a good thing, it's not a happy thing, but as sociologists, it happens. It's a fact. There's some science for you. There's some mad science I'm dropping on you. And so with stratification comes inequality. Those at the top of the hierarchy generally have more than those at the bottom. And humans self-enforce these. And then notions of justice and equality, now, or equity, I should say. Equity is different than equality. Equality says you and I have the same stuff, be it rights, material, or whatever. Equity says we have the same opportunity. What you do with it's on you. That's one of the big differences between communism and socialism. They've been conflated because of the history of Western society. The original Communist Manifesto, the idea was that everyone should have about the same. Socialism says everyone should have the same opportunity. The United States is actually much more of a socialist model than many people understand or even think. And if you take language out of context, it's amazing how socialist Americans actually are. And this has been done repeatedly with things like income distribution pie charts, where you're shown different pie charts. You say, what world do you want to live in, right? Or what world do you think the United States is like? Equity is very important. Opportunity. Everybody can make it, right? And then justice is if someone's blocking your opportunity. So, how did this play out in California? Well, let's go back to statehood. We're going to go back a little bit before that, but let's start with statehood. I feel like I'm missing a slide or two there. 1848, Mexican-American War, the United States wins. Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Mexico cedes what is all of the land that is now the American Southwest. This came at a very important time because slavery was an extremely hot, divisive, difficult issue. Not only California, but other states, the entire upper Midwest had not become states yet. Notice the intermontane West had not become states yet. The question was, are they going to be free states or are they going to be slave states? Remember, this is before the Civil War. Slavery is still legal in some places, but not others. Well, slavery, bad, yeah, but we got to do stuff. The slave economy in the southern United States was the economic driver of the early part of the nation. The United States would not be here today without the economic benefits that were accrued over the first 150, 200 years of slave labor in the United States long before the country was ever founded. People do not like to hear that. People do not want to face that. But in 1850, it was the reality because slavery was still going strong. So, the deal was California wanted to become a state. Economically and population-wise, it was possible because of the gold rush of 1849. So other places, not enough people. And you go, well, how is it possible that California had more people? Well, there was a gold rush. People poured into California trying to strike it rich. So we had enough people, and then you got to have money. Well, we got gold. Ta-da! Let's become a state. And so we were. Now, it was a testing ground because this was exactly the time when Congress was trying to sort out what are we going to do about the slavery issue. And that led to the Compromise of 1850, which was these states can remain slave states, but these new states cannot. They have to be admitted as free states. And California was the first test case of this. It came exactly during the Compromise of 1850. It was 5 different bills is what made up the compromise that passed. There was a proposal by a coalition of Southern congressmen, senators, and representatives that California should be split in half along the 35th parallel, and Northern California would be a free state, and Southern California would be a slave state. Wow. That would have been wild. Huh? How many people from Southern California? How many people from Northern California? Uh-oh. Civil War is brewing, Dr. Ann Thatcher. Winds of war blowing. NorCal, SoCal.
Crazy idea.
Crazy idea. But no slave labor. So what do we do? Well, we didn't. Why would we even consider that? Why would you even consider having slave labor in California? That's just stupid. It's a gold rush. Well, really quite crazy actually when you started looking at the geography. A lot of land, a lot of water, great ports. It's starting to look like Georgia. It's starting to look like something that could be. Okay. But why hadn't it happened prior to that? The colonials used slaves. The Spanish colonists used slaves. So why? Well, they enslaved the indigenous people, and they mostly did ranching, grazing. So their labor needs were relatively small. So agricultural labor in California during the mission period was done primarily by indigenous peoples, who then their populations declined due to disease. So the labor went away, and it wasn't that big a deal because it was mostly ranching. But then, a little bit later on, they planted wheat. And wheat comes in a harvest, in a great big harvest, and it takes a lot of labor to do it. So once California became a state, now there was a need for this labor, and we've already said no to slavery, so we're going to have to get it from someplace else. Another driver was the introduction of irrigation in the 1870s. The first major irrigation projects in the San Joaquin Valley were started in the 1870s. So a lot more land came under production. And not only did it come under production, it came under production at higher rates of production. I can produce more food per acre, which means I now need more labor to pick it. Then in the 1900s, you have the introduction of ice making and refrigerated rail cars, which means if I can grow a crop in California, I can now sell it in New York. So that's a real incentive. Again, let's increase production. Let's drive production up. And then in the early 1900s, electricity became introduced, or was being introduced, to drive things like irrigation pumps. So now I can drill a well in a place where there is no free water, and I can pump it out of the ground, and I can irrigate. So more and more and more land coming into production requires more and more and more and more labor. So like I said, indigenous people, essentially as slaves, declined due to illness. Ta-da. And this is, you got oxen and wagons. Pretty densely populated. I mean, pretty sparsely populated. Then came the gold rush, and there was a huge influx of people from China following the gold rush. We talk about the Chinese in California and being connected to the construction of the railroads, and that is true. But where did the railroad companies even get the idea that a nation of people located, I don't know what, 6,000 miles away on the other side of the Pacific would be people that you should be going to for labor. Remember, this is 1850. Take a month or more to make the crossing. Like not some small distance. So where did you get the idea? Well, there were Chinese coming in droves to mine for gold. And here's a picture of Chinese gold miners and white native-born American gold miners side by side. So how did the gold rush go? Did everybody come to dig for gold? Did they all become rich? No. That's why I think the 49ers is such a crazy team mascot. The 49ers actually culturally refer to people who had failed during the gold rush. Why would you name a team after failure? I still to this day can't. You know, how about the San Francisco Land Barons? There you go. Yeah. So they were available. So there was a bunch of Chinese around. They're not making any money. Hey, I got a railroad. I need labor. Here, I'll hire you. Okay. Then once they figured that out, they're like, hey, this Chinese labor thing is great. The problem is whites will not work alongside the Chinese. So I need more Chinese. I need more people who are culturally, ethnically, and racially Chinese in order to fill up my ranks so that I have order. And that was when companies in China began to import Chinese people in California. There was a group called the Six Companies. And they would go to large cities and they would advertise and they'd say, come to America and make your fortune. And people came in droves. And then they came over and they said, here's your sledgehammer and your hat. Good luck to you. Okay. So the Chinese came in and they were available. So then if they were available for the railroads, then they're available for agricultural. So that's great. Next came the Japanese. Now the Japanese came in much smaller numbers. And they were not around until the 1880s because the government of Japan prohibited immigration out of Japan. So like I'm looking into this, I'm going, what was the driver? Why suddenly did the Japanese show up in the 1880s? Well, because you couldn't get out of Japan until then. That's why. So then you had a few people come over, always in small numbers, and they quickly set about farming. But they did not want to be farm workers, they wanted to be landowners. So much like the Chinese, who came in large groups, started in agricultural work, then, very rapidly, they wanted to buy land and become farmers themselves, which they did, which means they were not available for labor. So then people said, well, who am I going to get next? Well, I'm already familiar with Asians. So the Japanese seemed like they'd be a good culture to use them. Same pattern happened. The Japanese said, well, no, I'm not. I'm working for you until I got enough money to become my own thing. Right? I'm not here for it. Which then led to, or was connected to, the Italian, Spanish, and Portuguese migrations. This was fueled by the unification of Italy in 1861. And there was a tremendous amount of economic turmoil. And many people from agricultural backgrounds became displaced. And they fled Italy. And most of them ended up on the East Coast, but there was a significant number that came and ended up on the West Coast. And we still have that heritage today. Italian Swiss colony, that's where that comes from. It literally was a colony of Italian Swiss. It was a community of people who came from the Tyrolean region and founded that. Same thing, they came to California, they wanted to become landowners, which they did, so they were not in the workforce for very long. Also, that process happened faster because there was less resistance within the communities to white immigrants than there were to Asian immigrants. So it was faster for them to acquire capital, it was easier for them to get loans, it was easier for them to get people to sell them land, etc. So even though the Chinese and the Japanese have been successful at that, that process happened even faster for the Southern Europeans, which then led to the Mexican migration. But wait a minute, Craig. California was Mexico, right? The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, it was Mexico. So what do you mean Mexican migration? There was nothing here. There was nothing here, man. It was a brave soul that went out to California. Jobs, industry, farmland, it's all in central Mexico. It's all in the interior, it's along the coastline. This place was empty. It was unused, essentially. So it wasn't until the United States took control of the territory and entrepreneurs invested in the capital to increase the production of these agricultural lands was there ever a demand for labor. So prior to it being in the US, it was ranch land. Then, now suddenly we need labor. So now is the potential for Mexican migration. Mexicans weren't coming up here in droves prior to that. Really interesting statistics if you go back and look at mission records and stuff like that. So why come to the US? Well, railroads. Oh wait, I thought the Chinese were working the railroads. Oh, wait. Railroad work sucks. It doesn't pay very well. Oh, I can't wait to grow up and be a railroad ditch digger like my old man. No, it does not work that way. So people came, they did it for a little while, we're still building railroads. We gotta go find something new. We gotta go find something new. All right, let's get the Mexicans up here and let's do this. And the Mexicans had a reason for coming up because they were coming out of central Mexico to the northern states, where there was in manufacturing, there was mining, there was smelting. They were building railroads in Mexico. They found out that the wages were higher in the United States. So they came over to the United States, and the railroad companies were happy to hire them since they had a labor shortage because any other group had dropped out. And then they had a railroad already. So we'll just shoot you across the country over here to California. There you go, boom. And everybody was happy. We did have a Filipino migration into the U.S. It was always small. It was never very large. Filipino involvement in California farm labor and farming is really almost kind of more symbolic because Filipinos, when they came, they were very intent on keeping their Filipino identity. Farm stand, fresh fruits and vegetables, Filipino. The mark of quality. So if you're that proud of what you do, you know, you're going to continue to maintain that identity. You're going to want to say, this is me. So so people know that. People know of Filipino farmers, but it's never really big. They did replace Southern Europeans with Mexicans and native-born whites as the Italians and the Portuguese started to acquire land. Now, white people. A lot of people in California can trace their ancestry to Oklahoma because of the Dust Bowl. But it turns out that wasn't all that was going on. A lot of people migrated to California during the Depression for economic opportunity. But they were all called Okies because the association of people from Oklahoma being the primary group. Turns out it's not true. But still, you get the idea. And, you know, it started out, all these migrations had traditionally been single young men, traveling unencumbered, no family, no children. This migration was different in that people came with families. Families made the migration. Anybody recognize this picture? You've seen this before? You know where this photo was taken?
Napomo.
Napomo, that's right. On her way with her children to probably pick some vegetables someplace if she's lucky. Well, again, the Depression ended. People got jobs doing other things, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, what are we going to do? Well, let's go back to Mexico. So, after World War II, the United States government and the Mexican government agreed to a program called the Braceros Program. And this program, the Mexican government worked with the United States government to recruit men in Mexico who were then brought in and identified through the program. They were then placed with jobs with employers in the U.S. And they would come for a contract. They would work for a certain period of time, and then they would return to Mexico. So that's awesome. We're not changing our real true population numbers. Nobody's coming here to settle. And then they got a bonus to return to Mexico, and that was, we will take 10% of your paycheck and we will put it in a savings account for you in Mexico. And if you want to see that money, you have to go back to Mexico to get it. Make sure you don't stay in the U.S. or you miss out on your 10%. Well, the bad news was people went back to Mexico, and guess what? No, they went back to Mexico and their 10% could not be found. Right? Now that was only for agricultural workers. The braceros who worked for the railroads, not a single dime went missing. Wow, hey, I got an idea, let's go work for a California farmer. Doesn't that sound like a great plan? No. So it doesn't take very long for the word to get back, like, hey, I don't really like this. It's difficult to administer. It was very difficult to track people, even to collect the money and whatnot. And then on the other side of it, there was demand for this, but these are the pictures that you don't see. If you joined the Bracero program, you had to go through a full military physical, very humiliating for rural Mexican men in the 40s. Cultural, humiliating for anybody. But wait a minute, you're not going to let me into your country to do your lowest paying jobs until you get to take a peek at my junk? Seriously? And then you're going to spray me with DDT? It's not going to take very much of a change economically for someone to say, you know what, I am not going to the United States. Forget that. So, Bracero's program eventually ended. Another migration, same pattern. The Hmong people. Anybody heard of the Hmong people? Yeah? They were recruited by the United States to fight communism prior to the outbreak of the Vietnam War, and then during the Vietnam War, and then they fought a civil war in the country of Laos. And this is I really should say Hmong peoples, because there's multiple ethnic groups that are part of kind of a shared ethnicity. And they did not recognize national borders that much. They lost the Laotian Civil War. The Laotian government began to persecute them, so there was a diaspora. They spread to all parts of the world. Many came to the U.S. This all happened in the late 70s after the collapse of the Civil War. Big concentrations in Minneapolis, Fresno, and Merced. Why? The way this happens is there was one Hmong person who arrived in Minneapolis and had a pretty good go of it, and they put the word out on the street. So then other people who are part of that same network go to Minneapolis, and it builds and it builds and it builds and it builds and it builds. The same thing happened in Fresno. And in fact, in Merced, there was one particular person who had been a general in the Revolutionary Army who had led thousands of Hmong soldiers over the decades. And he settled in Merced. He said, this is the best place on earth. And so people came. And he ended up living in Montana later. Same thing. As soon as they got enough money together, they became landowners. It was enough of a deal, though, that here's the CDFA, how to protect yourself from pesticide poisoning in Hmong, not Laotian, not Chinese. Notice it's about using our alphabet. Why is that?
Non-colonization in Southeast Asia?
Yes, that's the reason why it's that particular alphabet. But why not the indigenous alphabet?
Lost.
Is lost. Yeah, that's exactly right. People had to learn a new alphabet to speak their own language. That's kind of a big deal. Then there are additional migrations that have happened on and off over the years. El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Colombia, mostly the result of civil wars, economic upheavals. This is a rebel soldier during the El Salvadoran Civil War. Yeah, that'll drive you out of the country. You got 10-year-old kids with Kalashnikovs running around. I might pack up and move too, right? When you move to a new country, what jobs are available? The ones that nobody else wants, and that's agricultural labor. So, what factors have led to the supply, increase in supply? Social, economic, and military upheaval. Or changes in politics. So, war, Mexican-American War, Vietnam-era war, World War II, Bracero program, direct outcry of World War II. Not because we beat Mexico in the war, but because war changed the world economy. Hmong people, on and on and on. So that's when there's an increase in supply, is when people are migrating under stress. What's led to reductions? People assimilating into American culture. And it's not simply a question of contact. You got to remember, if you were Chinese in 1849, why would you leave China? I'm pursuing my dream. I'm going to go strike it rich. I'm going to go make $1 zillion in gold, and I'm going to become a rich and powerful man. So when you get to the US, what's your goal? I want to become a rich and powerful man. Your values haven't changed any, right? Nobody values that lower position. People value higher position. And so what kinds of concepts might explain this? Well, population flows, obviously, that are driven by things like war, famine, ecological collapse, changes in supply of labor where people go out and try to find other people, and then people wanting to work with people like themselves, homophily. Remember, the railroads had to go out and get more Chinese to work with the Chinese because they needed homophily for things to run smoothly. Same thing happened with Japanese and the Hmong. Japanese farm workers who would come immediately left the workforce because they went to work for a certain kind of farmer. You want to take a guess what kind of farmer? Japanese. I come to a foreign country. I'm looking for a job. I can lift heavy things. Now, do I want to lift heavy things for this white guy who calls me nasty names and is suspicious and I can't understand? Or do I want to go work for my nice Mr. Tanaka over here who understands me and follows my same traditions and I respect and who I can show respect to because I know how to do it? Right? All those kinds of things. So, what is the future going to look like? Well, if we go back to values, very quickly, Bill, here's the punchline. People probably are going to move for self-enhancement reasons, but once they have something to protect, they're going to move more towards conservation. As people get older, they move more towards conservation. Which means if you're going to be looking for people that are going to do things, try things out, you're going to have to be going after populations that maybe are on that openness to change side and not on the conservation side. When you do come across people that are on that conservation side, do not expect them to change how they are. Their children might, but they will not. So just very quickly, my predictions, agricultural labor will continue to drop in the United States unless or until there is some major political or economic or environmental upheaval somewhere in the world that displaces a large population of people. And based on the news last night, I think it might be Crimeans. We've already had an influx of Ukrainians and Belarusians into the Northwest. Also, we have population fluxes following pretty much every U.S. military action. So you should expect to see more Iraqis, Afghanis in the U.S. in the next few years. And those are the folks that will be available for agricultural labor. That's what my theory says. We shall see. And with that, I would like to close. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Okay, so you gotta go.
You know I have to run, and I apologize.
No problem, but you got the punchline now. You got the, okay. Now, I went real fast, I threw a lot of stuff at you, and I said a lot of things that probably made you uncomfortable. Maybe, maybe not. But
now you can talk about the South now that I'm leaving.
Yeah, now I'm talking about the South. I mean, I'm making a bold prediction. I'm saying that it's going to take some kind of massive upheaval before there's going to be any relief in agricultural labor, and I have reasons for believing it. Yeah.
Do you think that even with that occurring on a global scale, that the United States will be open to, receive those people with open arms? Or are they going to clamp down more on who they let in and how many?
Yeah, that is a problem that is faced not just by the United States, but every nation. And I do not know, I don't have a reason to believe in any particular direction for the United States. And I say it because we have a very strong public, we have a very strong public commitment to almost all of the values on the wheel as a nation. We believe in self-direction, but we also strongly believe in security, right? So how can I have security and also let everybody do what they want, right? We're really going through this right now, right? And so I'm not sure how it's going to play out in the U.S. The way it has played out in other countries is they have said, we are not going to allow more than a certain number of people in, and we're going to very closely guard our borders, physically going to keep people out. and then the economy starts to suffer because you don't have that labor. And they say, okay, well, what we'll do is we'll take the cream of the crop. So very stringent rules, no rest records, families preferred, level of education, and you can come in and you can work this low-paying job, right? But that person isn't going to want to stay in that low-paying job, right? And so the problem persists. And in some cases, the economy eventually starts to struggle pretty dramatically as a result. That's one of the problems that happened in Italy. The peasant population left, and the already existing economic problems continued dramatically through the late 19th century. So in the U.S., I'm not sure how it's going to play out, but it's going to be ugly anyway around it. Yeah.
At the beginning, you mentioned technology. How do you see that playing a role in the labor shortages and supply?
I'm glad that you asked that. An obvious solution to this problem is robots. No, I'm very serious about that. I'm trying to get a reaction, but I'm very serious about it. If you have a job that nobody wants to do, then don't have a human do it, have a machine do it. Machines don't complain, and they can work hard and they can work constantly. That's why we live in the society that we live in now. Industrialization, literally. Here's where I think it's going to play in. So let's say everybody gets on the same page and we all agree, okay, we're going to farm using all mechanical farming, right? Which in vineyards we can do. There's barriers to that, but we could do it. Which means then someone's going to have to operate and fix those machines. Now I don't need as many people, absolutely, I don't need as many people. But I need somebody to operate and maintain those machines. And now that I wiped away this lower level status of farm worker, the new lowest level status is mechanic machine operator. So I'm still going to have to find somebody that's willing to work in the smallest, least desirable part of the social totem pole, right? So we might solve many of our big world problems, right? We might actually be able to produce food with fewer people, but I pretty much guarantee that we will continue to have issues then finding the right people to fill the spots that we need to keep the machines running. That's what my prediction would be based on. The solution to that would be make machine operator and mechanic more glorious. Give it more prestige. Who do you think makes more money, a police officer or a sanitation worker? Sanitation worker, that is correct. Why? Because there is zero prestige in being a trash man. Police officer, on the other hand, highly prestigious. Are police officers well paid? Absolutely. But on a national average, sanitation workers do about the same, slightly better. So, yeah.
Do you see a trend shift for having workers stay on site year round because of the lack of availability on need basis?
I do.
And do you see that being a positive shift or a negative shift?
I see it as being a positive shift, but one that's not sustainable. So these trends obviously are long scale trends, right? So we've been suffering from less and less and less people willing to do farm labor since the end of the Bracero program. So we've been able to kind of get by, but we don't have droves and droves of people, right? So this is not a new problem, right? And one solution that employers have come up with is they said, okay, what's the downside to farm work? You know, it's physically brutal, it's seasonal, it doesn't pay well, it's migratory. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pay you better, I'm going to give you some health benefits, I'm going to treat you with respect. Just that right there, huge difference. I'm going to actually treat you like a human being. Wow, what a concept. I don't understand why people don't want to work with me, the stupid racial slurs, I don't understand. Seriously, dude? No, I mean, look, I've heard that kind of thing before. Yeah, well, gee, I wonder why people don't want to work for you, dude. Right. And then in things like housing or transportation or whatever. The problem is that people get older and they're not physically able to do the grueling parts of the job. And their children don't want to, because they have now adopted, they've looked around and they've seen what's the status hierarchy in this country. So if I've migrated and I was maybe very low status, or I had questionable status in the old country, I move here, and maybe I'm still at the bottom of the social ladder here, or at least I have a low status job, at least my status overall is much higher, my standard of living is much higher. Hey, I did great, but my kids are going to start at that standard of living, and they're going to want to do better. And that's where the limitation is going to come in. That's where the trick is going to be. Yeah, that's really where the trick is going to be, because classical economics says if there is demand, then labor should flow. And what's missing from that picture is status. You cannot raise wages high enough at this point economically to get white people to do farm work. I know that's offensive. I know that doesn't. I work hard. Hey, mom and dad, I'm not going to go to college. I'm going to go pick strawberries for a living. What do you mean pick strawberries for a living? That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to work 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, picking trays of strawberries. You're crazy. Yeah, but mom, I mean, I can make some money. And I can actually make some real money doing it. You're going to get a lot of social resistance because of where your perceived place in the class system is, what your abilities are, all that kind of stuff. And those processes will keep certain groups of people out of the workforce. And it's happening now all over the place. Yeah.
Okay, mine's kind of more on the people view of foreseeable future, I guess. If you're
Absolutely.
looking at ag labor potentially being taken over as, like, through robotics, as
Yes.
it's already kind of happening,
Uh-huh.
that coupled with this global normality economically and almost politically in a lot of instances, with first world countries and like the growing trend of that from second world countries, there's still going to be political unrest. There's still going to be this like diaspora going on all the
Yes.
time. What are those people going to do, or is there just going to end up being some deposit somewhere where people just don't have any work available?
Well, there's going to be a deposit where people don't have any work at all.
Yeah, where they can't go to some country, some first or second world country or something like that to like
where
go
does-
into ag labor or anything like that. Where do they go? Do they just end up sticking around, or
Well,
what
they
would
either
happen?
end up sticking around, which happens, or they migrate with no economic incentive.
right?
And this is what has happened in the political and economic upheavals in Eastern Africa. Very difficult for people from multiple nations in Northern and Eastern Africa to migrate. Europe did not want Africans. The U.S. a little bit better, still pretty tough. And there's no money, there's no where do you go, right? And that's one of the things that makes the current situation in Darfur what it is there is no way and no where and no how for people to go. They're just stuck. And that happened in Bangladesh. It happened in the Indian-Pakistan conflicts right after World War II. It's happening in Palestine. That's part of the Israeli-Palestine conflict. There's nowhere to go.
I guess my question is, that is already happening, but
Yes.
do you foresee with, I guess, just everything that's going on and where the future could lead, specifically in ag business and everything, do you foresee that becoming more of a presence? Even with such
Yeah.
positive things like robotics and ag labor and everything like that?
I would love to hear Dr. Amspach's response to that if he were here, because that's a very classic question in economics, is what's called surplus labor, which is labor that you have that there is no job for. And the unemployment rate in any country is the measure of how much surplus labor do we have, and it turns out you need to have some. There has to be somebody who can't work in order for the economy to function properly. And I need Dr. Amspach to explain that to me, but I do know that that's doctrinal. And so my guess is what we would probably see happen is we will see global unemployment increase. And we'll have to figure out what to do about that. Because efficiency will get greater, economic stratification will get greater, and there will be a lot of people left at the bottom that they have no resources and they can't go anywhere. I saw you.
So you talk about how currently there is a decreasing supply of agricultural labor.
Yes.
Is it not? Are Mexicans not coming in as great of numbers? Is that?
Not only are people not coming from Mexico in as great in numbers, but for the first time since they started keeping records a couple of years ago, we actually had net emigration out of the U.S. to Mexico. More people left the U.S. to Mexico than came in. So it's worse than that.
Because everyone's still kind of freaking out about immigration, at least from Mexico, and I think they're not looking, obviously not seeing this then, if they're
No.
freaking out about it.
No, they're not, and that's where things like race and ethnicity come into play. Is it's easy to identify somebody racially and say, oh, you're an immigrant, right? It's not as easy to do that ethnically, although you can. And so it's visual and it's visceral with people, and it pushes their buttons, right? So they have reactions to it. And you can say to people, and I've had these conversations numerous times, I have a chart. You know, I can show you that it's a net loss. You know, you're building a fence to keep people in at this point, is what we're talking about, you know. And they will deny it. They will say, no, my personal experience tells me this, I see this. Yeah, there are people who come over from Mexico illegally. Is it less than ever before? It's less than our folks going back to Mexico. And why are people going back to Mexico? Because Mexico is enjoying an economic recovery. And people are ethnically Mexican. You know, I mean, I've worked with a lot of people, farm workers, who are built a house in Mexico. Their mother lives in Mexico. Half their paycheck goes to Mexico. Anytime there's any kind of break for more than a few days, they travel to Mexico. They only watch Spanish language TV, which is produced by a Mexican company. And say, what are your dreams? Oh, my dreams are to go back to Puerto Vallarta and retire in the house that I built. You jokers. But what about the American dream? I actually had a guy say this. What about the Mexican dream? Excellent point. I had not thought of that. Perhaps you value things that are appropriate to where you're from more than you do my own home country, which I couldn't, you know. So yeah.
Well, you mentioned it, and it was towards the base question. I actually wrote a question down saying, because there's a wider gap growing of lowest and highest, you know, economic status, that stratification that's building, is there going to be a point reached, and it's going to be kind of like a breaking point of, I mean, there's so much ag awareness these days of where's the food without the farmer, and it's going to get to the point where,
Where's the farmer?
where's the farmer?
Right.
And do you think that people will have to come back onto the farm and just have to deal with it, otherwise we're not going to eat? I mean,
You know, I don't know, because there is no case to compare it to. We're at a point in human history where there really has not been anything similar.
so we're creating history at this point.
We're creating history. What has happened traditionally in the past is, as people lose farm, so Rome is a great example. At the founding of Rome, the area around Rome was all agricultural, and it fed Rome. And as Rome grew in power and as Roman culture developed, nobody wanted to work on the farms. And so those lands stopped being farmed. It wasn't that they got built on, nobody wanted to farm them anymore. So what do? Well, we're going to go out, we're going to build an empire, we're going to take the grain from the Gauls and the Mesopotamians, and whatever. We're going to go out and get other people's stuff. And now we're at a point where, well, you know, we're all in the room now. Like, there's always like, through that door lies adventure. And like now it's kind of like, well, here we all are, you know, so hand it over, dude. You know, I mean, like, yeah, so I don't know. I do not know. It's going to be very, very interesting to see what happens. So wait for another part of the room, maybe. Yes?
I have a question about, since a lot of farmers, because of the drought, have been planting more and more vineyards,
Yes.
what is that going to do to production of, say, like, apricots, oranges, and, like, other crops that we need to survive besides grapes?
They are going to go down and down and down, and we will increasingly import. Yeah, no, absolutely. China went, in a 10-year period during the mid-80s to mid-90s, China went from being not even on the list of top 10 apple growers on planet Earth. The entire freaking nation of China, like the agricultural power on Earth, they had so few deciduous orchards that they did not even measure as an apple growing country in terms of like the top 10. They made a decision at the government level, we want to change that, we are going to become the world supplier of apples. And in a 10-year period, they went from not on the chart to being the largest grower of apples in the world. They became then the largest exporter of apples in the world. And we're fortunate to live on the West Coast because even here, you're going to get about a 30% chance that an apple that you buy is actually coming from China. Asparagus coming out of Mexico now. A lot of our fruits and vegetables are coming from Mexico, Guatemala, etc. Because we're putting our land more and more and more into the status crop. You know, there are a lot of people who are vineyard consultants who plant vineyards for people who want to plant them. There are not very many people that are asparagus consultants who are out going, oh man, look, that's a pitch of asparagus. And there are those people, but, you know, that's not sexy. Seriously, it's not sexy.
Well, it's also because you don't get the return on asparagus too, right?
Say again?
It's also because you don't get that kind of return on asparagus too, right?
The return question. Actually, you get agriculturally in California, you get the best returns on things like broccoli and strawberries. So berries are dominating Santa Maria Valley right now. Billionaire. There are a couple of people. There's actually a billionaire in Santa Maria. There's a billionaire in Santa Maria. No, I'm serious. Billionaire. Very cool. So that's, you know, from being a very, I mean, they're billionaires in the wine business. Not a single one of them, other than a Gallo, made their money in the wine business. At that level, you know. And again, the Gallo, that's like the 1 in 1,000 case of 2 people who just would not take no for an answer, right? So what do you think? I mean, can we pull this off with machines?
No.
Why not? I heard no. Oh, that wasn't for me, sorry.
Not yet.
Huh?
Not yet. Maybe
Okay.
soon.
Why not yet?
I mean, if you're talking like viticulture, yeah, a lot of things can be done with machines, but I mean, there's like this high quality thing that happens when you like run a harvest thing through a vineyard and shatter the berries, and there's a large juice to skin ratio, and you bring juice mush to the winery, and you've lost a lot of good things and you've added a lot of bad things. So until like something from there to the winery, there's still going to be a demand for manual labor as far as like actually cutting the rachis off of the vine
Right.
to get to the winery,
I will.
to sort and things like that.
I will take you one step, to your point, I'll take you one step further, is that we could have the most amazing technology in the field for doing this, and people would still pay more money for the hand cut. Because it's tradition, right? It's important to me that it be handled, right? So, you're right. Now, what will be interesting is if we get to a point where there are 10 farm workers in California, and they become these like godlike people because they're the only people who will cut fruit. You know, I mean, yeah.
Even if there is like a machine that comes in, and I think Dr. Anspach was talking about this at one point, where it actually cuts the rachis off of the stem via some sort of like, I don't know,
Right.
whatever.
Whatever.
And it dumps it into the sorting table and people can manually sort. I mean, I think that's a step in the right direction, people are actually touching it. But if you're gonna use that as like a marketing scheme, then I can see how that wouldn't work.
So basically, one of the reasons that we're not there yet technologically is because we want so much out of this technology. It has to be a certain kind. Because this is the thing, like on the grower in me, the boots guy in me is like, labor, no problem. I will pick all day and all night for you. Problem solved. Pruning, no problem. I'll mechanically prune that. No problem. I'll get the job done for you. But then you have, oh my God, no, we can't use that. Oh my God, I wouldn't buy your fruit for anything. And then you say, okay, well, what about this robot? Like this one better? So if we can't get rid of labor because of tradition or whatever, then what are we going to do? How are we going to? What are we going to do? Where are we going to get people? How are we going to get them? Who are we going to attract? Why are we going to attract?
I'm gonna pay more.
Okay, we're going to pay more. So maybe give them more money so they can be more hedonistic, right? Or they can save it. So I might have to figure out what people's values are so I can appeal to them. Remember the Bracero program. We're going to take 10% of your money, we're going to put it in a savings account for you. You cannot be robbed of it. Lie. But you get the idea, right? Yeah.
Sorry, we can wait on this one because it's kind of unrelated. But as far as this table goes, I mean, you already made the point, but I see it much more of a cycle than a stratification. And is there anything that's looking at that on some sort of social level that's saying, you know, it seems that openness to change is the first one that you kind of realize.
Right.
Is there anything that's kind of pushing that at a younger level with society at large so that maybe you can reach this, you have the opportunity at least to reach this self-transcendence or enlightenment earlier in life to make for a stronger like social norm?
Yeah, it's the people's value that's called a values orientation. Where do I fit in relation to all those things? What's my orientation like? And orientations do change in response to education, changes in economic life, major life events, and in multiple directions, by the way. But then also a lot of it has to do with socialization as a child. So even though young people tend to be more on the openness to change side, young people in Western Europe and the United States tend to be much more on the openness to change side than people do from either Latin America or any of the Asia Pacific countries. So they're already a little bit more on the conservative side, but not.
Right, so is there anything that's been looked at besides like, that's not artificial, I guess, that's goes beyond just basic privilege that
Not really.
The enzyme for that? No.
Not really. This work is not. No one has picked up this ball and run with it. There is about 10, maybe 20 psychologists and social psychologists in the world that really are doing hardcore work on this, using this model. And this is like the best model out there. I mean, like, this is a. You know, this guy edited and wrote the foreword for a book on values that the American Psychological Association published a few years ago called Our Better Angels, about the role of values and morality in psychology and how important it is. I mean, that's pedestal, right?
Yeah.
And yet, there's not a whole bunch of people working on this.
It seems like things would fall into place, like this discussion wouldn't even be necessary.
Thank you. I would agree with you. If you're interested in that, you should go check out a website called We Value, WeValue, wevalue.org. And that is a website that's run by a group of academics that are interested in this stuff. And you can take a value survey that tells you a little bit about what your value orientation is like. You can read more about values. You can read about what they found out in terms of what different groups of people are like. You can learn about the role that values play in motivations and things like that. So, you know, people are trying to get the word out. That's why I'm doing this, because I'm trying to get the word out. And the same thing, like, my whole view of this is that from a non-science, from an applied standpoint, if I could get a sense of what somebody's value orientation is, I'm going to have a much more harmonious interaction with them, right? This is very frustrating for me when I talk to other faculty members, and I'm not saying this department, I'm saying in my whole career. You know, students, man, they're just bringing me down. They're so undisciplined. They always wait till the last minute. I can't. When will they ever learn? Like college students or some kind of like a thing that I've been whipping that thing and it still won't sit when I tell it to. And it's like, dude, it's changing every quarter. You're dealing with a type of person. You have to accept the fact that that type of person probably values stimulation and hedonism more than they value tradition and conformity at this stage in their life. So you should expect that they will do stimulating and hedonistic things, and that they will not conform to things like turn that assignment in on time, or do your homework when you're supposed to. I got a choice. All right, Mr. Rodriguez, if you're in 231, Mr. Rodriguez has told us every week to complete another chunk of our big lab assignment on vineyard establishment. And then at the end of the quarter, you'll have all the chunks. You put all together into a nice little paper, you hand it in. That's not what's going on. That's not what's going on. Everybody's going like, shoot, what are we supposed to do for that thing anyway? How much time do we got left? Like 7, 8 days? What? That's what people do. That's what this group of people do. So knowing that, what he and I did is we have worked with our classes every week saying, remember, don't wait till the end. I am here to help. Let's talk about it. Because one of the things that people need to get on top of, and this is, don't tell them I kind of gave this away, but one of the things about vineyard management is you're always behind. And you're always behind even though you started planning way ahead. And you got to get used to that idea of like, I'm going to put this ball in motion now, and then I'm going to keep running with it, keep rolling it, and hope that I get there, right? You can't wait till the last minute. And this is a safe environment where if you fail, you get an F. But if you fail out there, you're fired. So we took that into account, right? So it's a more harmonious relationship. Miserable for the students, but that's my job. So I think if more people got at least aware of this model, you'd go, oh, well, this person I'm dealing with is very concerned about security. So if I want to work with them or I want them to do something for me, I need to appeal to them. I need to show them I'm not a threat, right? If people are interested in stimulation, then I need to entertain them. I need to get their attention. I need to stimulate them. Right? Like that. Yeah.
But this trend that we're seeing in microbrewery, there's a movement of handcraftedness. You see
Yes.
that happening more in agriculture and taking away from the corporate structure and going back to small farm,
Right.
organic grow.
Right. I
farmers
see.
market thing.
I see that the higher economic, or the richer. I'm trying to find the best way to say this. The trend of people who have money to spend buying handcrafted food is going to continue and is going to grow. The trend of the 99.99% of human calories and nutrition consumed being produced by industrialized agriculture increasing will happen, will continue. So you're going to have people spending a lot of money to eat very, very artisan vegetables. And then the rest of the world is going to be eating Soylent Green. Well, I mean, that's my point. That's what I'm saying. So so smart money would be either try to be that artisan or try to be the captain of the agricultural oppressive industry. Feed the masses. There's two routes to go, but I think that stretch is going to go, and any kind of middle ground will get smaller, I think.
So, you see that food prices themselves are going to be the core driving impetus for change in its structure and its production and distribution. Is agriculture always going to be the low price totem of human sustenance and civilization? Is things going to get topsy-turvy to the point where,
So we have bread wars?
Yeah.
I think we will have bread wars, but those bread wars will actually be energy wars. I think energy is the commodity, is the one that's actually driving the boat. Because since we live in an industrial agricultural system, I'm sorry people do, diesel fuel is what makes food on planet Earth. Globally, it doesn't matter, it's diesel fuel. When that driver moves, then that will cause movement in the food side, And people will say, oh my God, I don't have bread to eat. Well, that's because, you know, your region did not have diesel fuel. Or there's no diesel fuel to move the product from where it was to where it was. So energy would really be the true driver behind it. That's what I think. So like we've been talking about, like if we come up with a solar powered tractor, like if you want true food security, solar powered tractor, man. Go. Vent. All right, well, I'm hot, tired, and sweaty, so I'm bored listening to myself. I know you're bored. All right, thanks for coming out. I guess you have